In a luxury sports watch, there are essentially three design tropes that Henter nailed. The last count, I think, because we did an exercise on this, there are something like 80 different versions of integrated sports watch, all with these three tropes. And the real skill of design is, and what we try to do, is always give a very Christopher Ward interpretation.
Hello everybody and welcome back to the WatchGecko YouTube channel with myself Richard once again coming from the bunker. About 8 months ago we were lucky enough to have Mike France from Christopher Ward on as a guest, and despite I'm sure his better judgment, Mike is back with us again today. Mike, thank you so much for joining me again.
That's my pleasure, Richard, and no, I think my judgment is okay. I enjoyed it last time, so hopefully I will this time too.
Well, I think based on the watches that you've got at the moment, I would go as far to say your judgment is exceptional at the moment, Mike.
Well, you say that to all the girls, Richard.
Moving seamlessly on. Mike, a couple of days ago, we got hold of the new 12.
Yep, 1236,
It was a watch that surprised us in so many ways. It was wonderful to see somebody being a bit innovative, thinking outside the box in the watch industry, which, blimey, we know is not easy. Please, can you just tell me a bit about the ethos behind the 12 and how you came up with this gorgeous design?
Well, as you know, the original 12 was launched back at the end of April and has been a huge success. I mean, I have to say, completely surprised us with the uptake, and we thought we were being bold, but it's 2 or 3 times anything that we ever imagined, and that goes across both the steel and the titanium versions. We knew, or we felt we knew, you never absolutely know, but we felt we had a winner on our hands when developing the 40mm version. And normally we would wait until we get a reaction to the launch size of any particular model before we considered a second size. But we were so optimistic about the likelihood of the 12 being a good enough line to warrant at least a second size that we were co-developing at the same time a 36mm version. I'm not sure it's as innovative as you very kindly suggest it is, but what we realized from developing the 40 and our early thoughts around the 40 was this is a watch that the 40mm watch has huge appeal to everybody anyway. But clearly 40mm for some people is a size too big. And, we were also very aware that of all the models that we have in our collection, the 12 probably has more of a jewel-like quality to it than any other, particularly in the stainless steel version. Although, to be honest, I think also to some extent in the titanium version, because we're quite good at polishing titanium. It's hard, but it's worth doing. We thought that a second size was inevitable, so we started developing it, as I say, simultaneously with the 40mm. And whilst it's possible, I suppose, if the 36 is similarly successful, we may end up with a third size of the 12. It's that good a watch for us. But the right size we felt as the second size was a size that would appeal to an even broader range of wrists, and particularly smaller women's wrists and smaller men's wrists. I mean, people with 5.5, 6-inch wrists, will definitely be big fans of a 36mm. We'd also had tremendous success with the 36mm Sealander, and so it seemed like a no-brainer to us. So innovative, I'll take that, but it seemed pretty obvious at the time, and so the 1236 is born.
Well, it's interesting because in the office, obviously, when we get a new watch through for everyone to look at, it gets passed around. The poor thing gets passed around to within an inch of its life. And it was very clear that a particular demographic of employee in WatchGecko and Gekota really loved the watch because of its size, because of its style, because of its colouring. It very bold, vivid colours, that the pastel colours, which we're seeing so much of now at the moment. If that was your intended audience, then you nailed it, because it was very, very popular.
Well, it's very kind. And similarly, in our own environs, we've had a a fantastic response to it. Some people who liked the 12 but haven't bought one, even with our very generous friends and family discount, have put their names down immediately for a 36, and that covers both sexes. Both men and women in the office have gone for it. So, I mean, you and I both know as well. I think there is, this trend towards slightly smaller case sizes has been happening now since the back end of the financial crisis at the end of the noughties. I do think that 36 millimeter is having a big moment.
Yes,
and this is, to some extent, thank you, Rolex. But it's also, I think, a recapturing of for men as well as women, recapturing of a size that used to be considered quite big.
Well, exactly.
If you go, I just think people are getting used to smaller watch sizes, and if you're looking to make a statement, then a 36 millimeter makes a statement. And you only have to look at recent red carpet events at film premieres and awards ceremonies. The number of celebrities who were male celebrities, particularly, who were wearing 36 millimeters, probably was one of the most obvious trends on the carpet. So I do think it's having a moment, and let's hope so, because we're wanting this to be another winner.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I was talking to one of the senior people in one of the big auction houses recently, and she said to me that they are now doing away with the genre definitions of male and female watches, because less so ladies going to big Daytona size watches, which we all know they did in the late 90s. It was very trendy. More, as you point out, because of the other way. It was interesting. Because I was not in a position to afford a 1968 Rolex Explorer 1, I decided, at the behest of some of my colleagues in WatchGecko, to get a 1968 of the first watch I'd ever bought, or I was given, which turned out, thanks to information from my parents, to be a Timex Mercury. So wow. I found a beautiful 1968 Timex Mercury. Of course, it comes through, it's 32 millimeters. My first reaction is, gosh, this is really small. But it slowly turned into a real love affair. And people have commented on it, saying, oh, what a great watch, Richard. It's so neat, but it looks really cool. So I think there's definitely some mileage in this.
Oh, I think so. And, in the same way that if we go back to the early noughties, the bigger the Hublot Big Bang, the better. That was making only if you were a professional footballer. In my view, the bigger the watch was, the bigger the statement seemed to be. And I do think, one of the mores and one of the trends in our society is understatement to some extent now, but everybody still wants to be seen. And therefore having a smaller watch on your wrist is almost the sort of statement that has taken over from having a large watch on one's wrist.
Absolutely.
So it's interesting. And we went Agender 12 years ago. We've not described a ladies or a men's watch since. And a lot of people are now describing watches only by case size. So that's again another indication that the merging of what's going on in our society, the merging of the genders, the confidence that people feel to wear and express themselves in any which way they want. I think all of these things are playing into a much more fluid approach to watch design. And our designer, Will Brackfield, actually said recently he feels it's easier than ever to design a watch that appeals to a broad-based audience.
One of your lines when I was reading about the watch yesterday and doing some homework on it was you came out with what I thought was a lovely line, which says, a watch that lives in both worlds. And I think you're referring to the fact that it's not really a tool watch, but it's not really a dress watch. That was the intention, one assumes.
Yeah, exactly right, Richard. I mean, it's like all luxury sports watches, the integrated watch design, I think, has that sort of crossover appeal in every sense of the word. It can be worn as a sports watch, but it also can be a superb evening watch as well, and by anybody. The very first 12, I although I'm wearing a C60 concept at the moment, generally I've not been a bracelet wearer. I personally have all tended towards leather straps or even rubber straps on a dive watch. But I was testing the original 1240mm in stainless steel back last year. Happened to be in Barbados on holiday, and we were in a flashy restaurant, and because the lights were down, it really was the watch was catching the light, and several people spotted it and came to the table and asked, what watch was I wearing? So it's got that sort of real sort of dressy appeal as well. It is a bit glam, but it also acts as a perfect everyday sports watch. So yeah, it's got really broad appeal.
Well, I think looking at it, I mean, one of the thoughts I had when I was looking at it was a phrase that popped up from a company I used to work for a million years ago, which was something had been designed without compromise. And I would apportion that phrase to this watch because I was looking at particularly the 3 finishes on the case, and I think that's not something that's happened on a whim. That's a conscious decision. I mean, I don't know whether or not you can elaborate on the kind of detail you go into at the concept stage when you're thinking about the brushes and finishes on the watch. Because to us who buy them, we look at it, we do see these things. That's the beauty of it. We do notice it.
It's reassuring that you do notice. I mean, you're right. I mean, a lot of people, even if they're not aware of what it is, they will notice light playing off a case or off a dial, and they may not be aware always, and why should they be, of the different finishes that allow that to happen. I mean, you will know that we have become well known, at least, for our light catch case and the architecture of cases. We think that case design is one of the not forgotten but unused arts of watchmaking. There's a lot of slab-sided watches. Robots are increasingly playing a role in polishing, and of course, you want simplicity in a case design if you're going to get a robot to finish it. We still insist that all of our cases are hand finished and hand polished, and they have to be because the complexity of the architecture demands that. And the reason for that architecture is because it serves several purposes. I mean, in the initial stages of going back to our original light catcher design, for instance, albeit this particular watch we're not referring to it as a light catch because it has some serious differences, but it's the principles apply just the same, but in a different format. We were looking for the case to sit as low as possible on a wrist, even if it was higher in millimeters than some of the other watches in the collection or other people's watches. And therefore we followed the automotive route. You'll be very familiar, most people are, with the way in which car companies use different ways of making a car look as if it sits lower on the road. So they bend metal so that it reflects light in a certain way, so it makes the car sit lower. We're all boy racers at heart. Even SUVs have become masters at this, even if they're sitting really, really high on the road. They look sleeker than they would do if they were just straight-sided. Well, we use that approach to think about the way we created watch cases, because we thought the same principles would apply. The difference being that you rarely get different finishes on the side of a car, whereas on a watch case you can actually have several different finishes, and that in its original purpose was to make it sit lower. For the 12, however, what we were looking to do was both to accentuate the dodecagonal bezel, so we have 2 different finishes either side of a different finish on the bezel itself, so it accentuates that bezel, but also on the case and on the integrated bracelet to give that play of light, because this is a way of attracting looks and a way of accentuating the I suppose, the quality of the finishes. So, the chamfered edges that we've used are multitudinous, and only when you wear the watch, and as I say, under artificial light in a restaurant in Barbados, was when I really, really got to understand how attractive this was on the wrist. And that's been played out as people have bought the watches since April. One of the most frequent comments we get back from people is in wear is exactly what we wanted, which is they just find it a fascinating, ever-changing watch on their wrist, further accentuated by the textured dial, which also has been designed for the same effect. So you've got this multiple play of light going on, which wouldn't, it takes effort and it takes time. And fortunately, we've got great designers, and then we've got wonderful, uncompromising people who make the componentry, and will not compromise on the sort of level of quality that we're looking to achieve. Just
backtracking for a second, because the next thing on my list was the dial. Obviously, the texturing is extremely complex, especially if you're zooming up on it. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is it pyramids?
Well, no, it's what it is. It has the appearance, in a sense, of a sawn-off pyramid. But what it is we've taken one component of our logo and replicated it. So if you look closely, it's the cross, but because of the flat upper surface, of course, it does look like, at one level, like a sawn-off pyramid, if you will. But it's actually our logo, which again, because of the way it's constructed, you've got that play of light all over it.
I mean, looking at the watch, I mean, when I'm looking at it online, one of the things I tend not to do, which is look at other people's reviews of watches before I speak or write about things, and because I really like to formulate my own opinion. But naturally, your attention drifts on the internet, and there are parallels being drawn with the watch. You draw it yourself on the website from the AP and the Patek. This, I mean, obviously it's a conscious decision on your part with the designers. How do you rationalize that in your head? How do you balance that without saying, well, we're not making a clone here, but we just want to make a nod to it? It must be a fascinating conversation around the boardroom table.
Well, it's many conversations. I mean, but this is largely watch design. I mean, perhaps unusually in the watch industry, we always like to reference our references, and it's hard for anybody who's creating an integrated bracelet watch not to reference Gerald Henter. I mean, the Royal Oak inspired his Nautilus, which inspired the Ingenieur, which has gone on to inspire every single integrated watch that's out there, whether it be the Zenith Defy, whether it be, the Laureato, whether it be, more modern versions of it, the Japek Antarctique. They've all understood there are, in a luxury sports watch, there are essentially three design tropes that Henter nailed. And then he himself reproduced in different forms for different brands. I mean, and there are, the last count, I think, because we did an exercise on this, there are something like 80 different versions of integrated sports watch, all with these three tropes. And the real skill and the real art of design is, and what we try to do, is always give a very Christopher Ward interpretation. Yeah. So the three tropes, and you'll be familiar with these, are firstly, the bezel. So, the Royal Oak, was a revolution in terms of bezel design when it came out, and virtually every single interpretation of a luxury sports integrated watch since then has played with the bezel. We've decided that we would go for the dodecagonal, the 12-sided bezel, hence the name the 12, because in many ways 12 is a magic number in horology. It's a magic number per se. Everything we do in horology is somewhere divided by 12. So that was our inspiration for the bezel. The second trope is, of course, the textured dial. For us, as we discussed, to have something that was so Christopher Ward, e.g. our logo, seemed even if Richard, you didn't spot it, seemed to be ultimately a natural choice, and that gives it a unique CW element. And then the third trope, of course, is the integrated bracelet. Now, there are several things going on there that make this very uniquely CW. Firstly, if you're integrating a bracelet or any strap into a watch head, there are just essentially two ways of doing it. You've got the masculine way of doing it in terms of the single element coming out from the case, or you've got the female where you've got two, and the vast majority are the female version. Yeah, we had with our 10 years ago, with our first integrated bracelet watch, which is the C2 Lido, we had decided to go the male route, and there's a nice follow-on touch from those followers of ours who remember the watch, and there are some. There's a nice genuflection to ourselves, if you like, in the 12 to our original integrated bracelet watch. But then what we've got is these single links, rather than virtually every other one has got sort of some form of integration, second link going on, for two reasons. One, we wanted A, to be different to everybody else, but B, we wanted to be able to come in at a cost that allowed us to, deliver something that starts at below £1,000, and even below $1,000. That's where we came upon what is quite a unique interpretation of the bracelet. But as it's ours, the chamfered edges of the bracelet are beautifully constructed, and you get these single sweeps across the bracelet, which, as I say, play with the light brilliantly well, and it also creates this uniformity of look, which we think adds really well to the integration, if you will. So you've got this almost holistic. It's 3 millimeters in depth, so it just looks as if it's part of the case as well, which is one of the tricks. Not all of them do. When you look at the marketplace, some of the bracelets are a bit thicker than we would want, but we wanted this to have the sort of fully integrated feel, and it's honestly it is without question, I think, the most comfortable watch we've ever created.
Yeah, I appreciate the effort that goes into it. I think probably you're right. I think there are people who will buy a watch and enjoy it and wear it, and there are people who will look at it in huge detail and revolve it around in their hands, see how the light plays with it, and it is what we found was, and it's really interesting because you actually said it yourself, it's one of those watches that the more you play with it, the more you see in it, the more you feel is there. Every little angle speaks something differently to you. And that makes then the ownership of the watch that much more rewarding and satisfying when you can look at it 10 years later and say, I really love the brushing on that. It's so nice when you can do that sort of thing, because these things are, things you'll want to keep. Or how do you think that the market would react to things like the Tissot PRX, which, is in so many ways similar, but
yeah. I think the PRX is an excellent watch.
Yeah, that seems to be the general consensus on the internet. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a brilliant watch, and I know that it's been a huge success for Tissot. With the decline, particularly the decline of quartz watches, I think they needed something to bring back to life one of the most famous watch brands in Switzerland, and I'm delighted, because possibly my first really proper watch was a Tissot, which my parents bought for me for my my 21st birthday.
Wow.
And that was my first proper mechanical watch. And so this is, Tissot is a fantastic brand, and I think what they've done with the PRX is brilliant. It is at a stunning price point. I think the difference, if I may be so bold as to suggest, and others have said it rather than just us, but if you have a PRX in hand and a 12 in hand, what you will notice is the difference in finishing. to achieve the price point that Tissot have achieved, which is stunning in its own right, they, in my view, have had to take some views about the level of finishing. And, that's perfect for what they're trying to achieve. But for us, again, to separate ourselves away from anybody, it's you use the phrase, and I we are uncompromising in our approach to these things and our quality generally. I think people, because we're often seen, and our price pointing says we're an entry level brand, mechanical brand. We certainly want people to have access to our watches, but that shouldn't. The real reason we're accessible is more to do with our business model than it is to do with taking shortcuts. Because the last thing we would ever do is take a shortcut. I mean, I was having this conversation last week with somebody, and our quality standards are often significantly above those that are standard in the industry. Where the industry will take a view that if it looks okay from 30 cm, it's passable. We will put it under a microscope, and if it doesn't pass the microscope test, it fails. So these are standards that we have developed, as opposed to that which is necessarily in the industry. And that's because I think for the last 20 years we've had to work harder, because of our price pointing, to convince people that the quality of our watches is quite what we say it is. But most people who end up owning or wearing or having in hand a Christopher Ward, I think generally will get it. They understand that this is not a typical entry-level watch. This is doing something else, and it really is just our 3 times multiple versus 7 or 8 average in the industry that allows us to have the price point we have.
Well, I'm glad you used the magnifying glasses, because now that would explain why our photography team love doing macro shots so much.
Absolutely. And so they should never stop doing so.
Oh, no, that'll never happen. Look, mate, it's a beautiful watch. Thank you for bringing it to us. We're going to get a really good feature up, and we're going to keep reviewing the watch. And we think it's just such a wonderful addition to your portfolio that, all we can do is wish you the best success ever with it.